Hello friends! As said in part 1, my too long didn't watch review is that I don't like the Invincible comic. It's a 3 out of 5 work that goes on too long, and because it forces in so many bad plot points and social issues, that it gets lowered to a 2 out of 5. There are going to be spoilers in this video, don't watch if you care about that, and in this video I'm going to assume you know the story of Invincible, so if you don't, just go watch or read summaries about it. Wikis have the story pretty well summarized, and there are vids who do it too. This vid is part 2, but it can be watched without part 1. Part 1 points out a lot of the wokey bullshit included in the comic, and I do explain why it's not good to add that, but these reasons that in this video really center on the comic itself. First off, the character of Eve. We've talked about her social issues quite frequently in part 1, but what I'm about to say isn't about that. It's about her powers. Adam Eve has the power to rearrange atoms, which allows her to create anything from anything. For those unaware in terms of world building and meta-narrative, characters with this ability are incredibly overpowered. It is world-breaking to have a character like this, and not even in the typical superhero sense, but more of a healer sense. Any damage she could repair immediately. And in the series, there are frequently characters which come to near death, there's a lot of destruction goes on, and Adam Eve can just fix all that, so it feels very pointless in a way. You know, if anyone dies, just revive them. Do you need some material for some technology? She can make it. Do you want a nuclear bomb on command? Boom, she's got it. Now, the way most comics get around this is that they introduce a character with limits. However, Eve is not introduced at all with the limits. There is no indication that she has any at all, and it's as if the writers kind of forgot what her powers actually were and just thought it would be cool. And it is cool, but when you quickly realize her power, you kind of begin to ask, like, why isn't Eve doing this? Why isn't Eve doing that? And, you know, several times in the show and the comic, it's kind of a wonder of like, man, I really wish Eve would just use her powers to heal everyone or fix things. They later try to recover the fumble by saying she can't modify organic material, but this isn't true because in the comic she creates food, plants, etc. She just for some reason cannot heal people. Oh, and ironically, she actually heals herself too. So, you know, during the revival process, clearly her powers can do this stuff. And this just shows that the writers don't really understand character superpowers, which is alright, but I think for an iconic work like this and people who are around the space probably should not have made that mistake like that. Number 2, character deaths. There are so many random character deaths that it's not even funny. The comic seems to fall into the trap of baiting character deaths so frequently, some characters feel chosen to die for no other reason than the author just choosing them to die. One of the things I actually really like about Invincible is that characters do die and they actually are mortal. However, it ends up happening in a way that just feels very lacking and undeserved. No death that happens in the series, aside from the murders of the Guardians of the Globe, feels right. The reason why it feels so random and wrong is because characters do not tie into the intended message of the story, where the intended message is that saving people is right, even if you have to go through somewhat evil means to do that, but because the message isn't complemented with the deaths, you end up in this narrative that just feels very lackluster. For example, Rex's death. Rex ends up sacrificing himself to kill one of the evil Invincibles that happens in the series. And when he does this, it's very impactful and you really feel remorse for it. But, like, what did Rex really, I guess, gain, kind of? You know, it was sort of a martyrdom type situation, but a lot of the characters in the series don't really like him, and he ends up sacrificing himself even though that people don't like him, which I guess kind of adds a little depth to it. But it just feels like, why did he have to die versus any of the other characters? I feel like a lot of the other characters, you know, could also have done the same way. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the sacrifice isn't set up that well. It just doesn't feel, you know, as impactful. And you know, I will say that a lot of the characters, their response to the death is just not very what you would expect, and in typical Invincible fashion, you'd kind of just move on after the death. So, yeah, that's just one of example, and there's plenty of other examples too. Number 3, there are too many betrayals. Alongside character deaths, there are betrayals. Some don't make sense and some are okay. The betrayal of Robot, for example, by not only his wife, Amanda, Monster Girl, the characters which are supposed to be deeply in love with each other, but ultimately the betrayal of Robot by everyone in the end despite him making a better world for everything, which is what they consistently say they want to do, like all the heroes, and kind of the message of the comic is to make the world a better place through sacrifice or sometimes, going against your morality. It really makes zero sense for Robot to be betrayed. And in fact, the characters have grown up around Cecil Stedman, and they should have treated him as a new Cecil Stedman, right? Like, they should have been following his footsteps, and Cecil would have probably made the same decision too. I think the writers at this point just really wanted to hate Robot and have like a big bad evil guy at the end. Some betrayals are alright. I kind of dig the whole Cecil utilizing the bad guys for the good of the world, but there are just too many times of, oh, here comes a bad guy. Oh, he's the bad guy. And then suddenly, after his arc, he just immediately becomes the good guy. Once or twice is fine, but then it becomes cliche, and this is kind of the cycle of Invincible that I talked about a little bit, where it just keeps on doing that, and it, just keeps on going downhill after every cycle. Because you end up not caring about it, because every single relationship that is established, you end up not really caring because it's meaningless and temporary. Even Invincible's half-brother, who has been with Invincible from the start, ends up betraying Invincible and his family, which is so out of character and unbelievable that, like I said, when this happens, you're not exactly really shocked. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, that was expected, and it shouldn't have happened. And to deepen the thing, most betrayals come with guilt of the character in which they go back on what they wanted to do in the first place, which makes sense for some characters and does deepen them. But when this happens every time, it really doesn't leave much room for evil. The topic of evil in stories is a whole other video, but having everyone be morally gray and some kind of bad or in some kind of good works in storytelling in small amounts. Generally, you want raw evil and raw good, which is far better than just everyone being muddled in betrayals and guilts. Number 4, multiverse and time travel. This should be a shorter section, but whenever a series introduces time travel, everything becomes horrible. There is only one series which has ever done time travel pretty well, and that's Steins Gate. And even though it's because of the way the time travel happens, meaning it's not true time travel, it's just retaining knowledge in different world lines. But in this, when you introduce the idea of traveling through time in any work of fiction, suddenly things become very muddled. It means that things that you care about in the series gets altered. Now, time travel in Invincible isn't really a big thing other than on one specific time, which Mark literally has to be saved by time travel because otherwise he's stuck in the dimension forever, right? And the problem with Invincible is that it's more about the multiverses. Multiverses have a lot of the same problems with time travel, and in many ways it's far worse. Because you introduce too many what-ifs instead of time travel, you end up in a situation where all realities occur. Characters are characters because of what they do. Creating and adding in a multiverse removes character traits because you're saying it all really comes down to a what-if type situation, and in many ways, it's a very lazy way of storytelling for two reasons. The first reason is that instead of continuing stories or making new ones, writers can just use the same character over and over and over again, which in general is why I don't really like comics either. Can you describe Batman or Superman? Now, everyone has ideas of who these characters are, but ultimately they are all wrong. Does Batman use guns? Well, if you said no, he actually does use guns, and in the comics he has been shown to use guns. Is Superman's only weakness kryptonite? Well, you'd be wrong about that too. He has weakness to magic and the red sun, which are just things written in later on in the series. In Invincible, the multiverse is used by one of Invincible's arch nemesis, Angstrom Levy, who can open up portals into the multiverse. The problem with this is that now, when access to multiverses, he can find a solution to everything. Want to beat Invincible? Find a multiverse that has a solution. Want to take over the Earth? Find a multiverse where she already did that. Remember, with a multiverse in fiction, now anything is possible. Which leads to the second reason why it's lazy. If you ever end up in a scenario where there's no solution for the story, you can just slap in a reason from a multiverse, and there you go. Because remember, when a multiverse exists, it's not just our universe that has the ability to access other multiverses. Other universes will also have access to every other universe, which means once you open up this Pandora's box, other multiverses gain that ability to access all the other worlds, causing a huge world-building catastrophe. Because now you have to explain why the multiverse isn't just a giant mess of things, but rarely it ever gets explained at all, and there really isn't an explanation. And this happens so frequently in comics and series with multiverses that it's just horrible slop. A common retort to this is just saying that it's a fun concept. And, yes, it can be fun, but for storytelling, it's just not as good as a tightly written story with well-defined characters that you can actually describe. Commonly, it's said that in stories, nobody remembers the plot, but they actually remember the characters. So yeah, it's fun to think about Batman being the bad guy, but why would you? Although I've used Batman and Superman here as low-lying fruit, this doesn't compare at all to the abomination that is Spider-Man. And in case you've been living under a rock, Spider-Man the series has fumbled so hard on the characters of Miles, who is supposed to be the new Spider-Man, he isn't even viewed as such. Readers have rejected really any attempt for Miles to be Spider-Man, which kind of makes my point for me. Miles isn't Spider-Man. And in the multiverse, the other Spider-Mans aren't Spider-Man either, but they are, which leads to people creating them as new characters. So the question is, why even bother with having them be the same character? Oh, I know why. It's because you need the brand of Spider-Man to sell comics. That's really the reason why that type of stuff exists. The writers are so bad that they can't create anything new of value, so just use the brand name and there you go. In Invincible's case, it's using itself in much the same way. You need some bad guys where the bad Invincibles come into their universe and, mess shit up. Oh, you can't develop a new bad guy. You have to use Invincible's evil versions to do that. Lastly, and this is the biggest reason, the message conflicts and contrasts itself. The message could be that the world is pragmatic and that it can't be ordered. So at the core of Invincible, the morality struggle is whether or not it is right to kill in order to gain your way. Is violence the answer if the solution is a better world? One of the first tasks Invincible has to do is handle Alan the alien, who comes to Earth to test the Guardian of Earth, but Invincible talks it out and conflict is resolved through diplomacy. As the series goes on, Invincible is tested time and time again with the question of whether or not he should kill in order to have peace. But again, he is able to talk things out with most of his enemies, which sometimes is very nonsensical, but sometimes actually makes sense. For example, the story with Titan fighting Machine Head, this is pretty cool because Invincible talks it out with Titan instead of just treating him like a criminal, and of course Titan kind of betrays him, but this is a cool setup to try and say, hey, we can talk this out and try and gain an ally. But in a bad example, Dinosaurus, the crazy, insane climate change villain, Invincible is able to convince him that he is wrong, which doesn't seem very in character. At the end, there's no reason why he would change his mind about that stuff. The discussion is about 100 words and suddenly is like, oh dang, you know what, you're right. Me killing about 1 million people is definitely wrong. Oh geez, oh man. There really is no logical realization, it's just no, you're wrong, and the villain agrees. This happens again with another villain who hates Invincible, blaming him for the problems, but Invincible talks to him and he realizes he is wrong again. These type of interactions are just so unrealistic and very surface level, there has to be a reason why people change. It doesn't just happen. It also talks about what decisions that Invincible makes in determining what is right or wrong, and in the end, it seems as if Invincible has handedly decided that killing is wrong, and that there is always a better way to a solution. But in the finale, they do Robot dirty. At the end of the series, Robot has taken over Earth and turned it into basically a utopia, just as he did in the alien civilization he ruled. He ended up having to kill several heroes, but afterwards things were for the better. Crime was down, happiness up. Invincible doesn't like it, and several other heroes hate it as well. The rebel faction is strong at the start, but as time goes on, the rebels just realize Robot is right about things and goes along with them. Invincible makes a statement about how Earth can't be a utopia, and it just it needs the constant chaos, and it's better with the destruction so that heroes have to come and save it, which is antithetical to what he really believes. And in the end, he confronts Robot in space. Do you think they talk it out, as Invincible has done with so many villains, causing them to realize they are wrong? Nope, not even 10 words are spoken, and Invincible kills Robot, which completely defeats the morality that Invincible wants to have. See, ultimately, although the comic is really trying to talk about things like violence is not the answer, it's really talking about the belief that might makes right. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are. If you have the power, you can do whatever you want. And this is what Invincible ends up deciding on, which I'm fine with, but I don't think that the authors really understood that this was the point they were making. And it really undermines what they were attempting to go for. I think they set up this final battle as a sort of, if all else fails, then violence is the answer, but you don't really get that. And I frequently see online in discussion places that they talk about the morality of Invincible as handled so realistically and how it's handled so good, and it's so much better than other comics, and I'm just like, are we reading the same comic? Because this is very surface level morality of just, hey, I have the superpowers and I get to say what is right or wrong. And that's ultimately what it ends up being. Lastly, this isn't a big deal and it's not a major problem, so it's not a point, but the quality of the comic art is all over the place. It starts very indie and very rough, and then some of the art becomes very good, and then some of it is very bad, even in the later parts, right? It's just so spotty. It happens in random spurts throughout the time of the comic, and definitely more towards the end. In some of the issues, they have these really cool spreads advertising the great artists at Image, which I really liked. But then you get some panels like this in comparison to this, and you're just like, what happened? I would guess that at sometimes, artists are working on other comics, and you get lesser artists to work on Invincible for non-meaningful issues, but it's an unfortunate situation that they could not maintain the quality all the way throughout, and especially at the end. I would guess that the artists end up having to fill in for the main artist, maybe. Maybe he quit and moved on to different projects. Maybe he didn't want to do it. I don't really know, and I didn't really look it up because, like I said, this isn't too big of a deal. This isn't a big deal to me at all. It's just, it's just something I noticed. I can handle bad art. I don't mind bad art if the story is good, So this concludes my Invincible the comic review. If you've read the full comic, please tell me why I'm wrong or what you think about it. Or if you haven't, definitely read a summary. I'd probably say don't bother reading it. That's just my opinion. I think these stories that don't have problems are far better, but Invincible with them becomes very flawed. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.